What nobody told me when I first started on my own art journey, and what I had to work out for myself, is that color can completely change your confidence. And there seems to be an illusion at play when we watch artists creating their work and colours just seem to come into their hands and flow onto the pages and or onto their canvases, onto the artwork. And it seems effortless and like it's all coming from a place of intuition. And although that is true to a certain extent, there's no right colour combinations to choose. And when we view colour as a mysterious entity that we may not be completely privy to the ins and outs of, it can make colour choices sometimes feel a little daunting. So when I'm teaching people in live workshops, I tend to make everyone use all of the colors so that you can experiment and realize that color doesn't understand or know any real rules. And we've all seen the books and lessons and teachings on color combinations that work. And yes, absolutely true. Some colors are more beautiful together than others, but it is so subjective. And part of creating, part of being an artist, being an artistic person, is discovering exactly what it is that you don't like. And that is just as important as discovering what it is that you actually love. So let's start with a blank page. And sometimes a blank page can really feel like a test. What if you ruin it? What if you choose the wrong sketching tool from the very, very start? Well, I'm going to be using a literal head start here. I've got a soft place to land and I'm using a stencil. This is one of my stencils. It's called Lace Face. And using a stencil or a stamp or any other drawing aid is not cheating. Sometimes people feel like it is. A stencil is just a cheerleader. It is a tool to get you going. So I'm using this stencil as a really well-known friend. She gives me just enough to begin, just enough to feel brave to get that drawing started. And then whatever comes next is mine. And that's how I want you to feel about my stencils or anyone's stencils. They become your lines, your expression. Everything that you create becomes yours. My version of a face is now quietly waiting to bloom into a new direction. So I've just taken the face. I haven't stenciled out all of the lacy parts. I've got other videos that show this stencil in action. And with this little whisper of support, I'm going off in a direction of my own. And if you're familiar with my style, you know that I like to play with proportions and play with the placements of features. And I encourage you to change things around when you're stamping or stenciling or using a drawing aid like this. Really play around with it. Why not move the eyes? Why not move the mouth further over? Make it bigger, make it larger. Play around with the length of the nose. Nothing's set in stone. What is really helpful though, when you're going to be working like this, especially with the technique that I'm about to show you, use a waterproof pen. Now, being somewhat of a pen aficionado, I have a lot of choice in my waterproof pen options. I've got the finishing line pen in my hand at the moment. That's part of a set of 10 different nibs, from microfine, which is what I'm using here, through to a really lovely super brush. I've also got gorgeous fountain pens that I love to use. I think that's what I started off with. And I like to load them with tattoo ink, which is one of my amazing waterproof, bomb-proof inks. It comes in a skull bottle just to make it easy to spot when it's in your studio, and well, it just looks really cool. And the reason that a waterproof ink is wonderful is because then when I go to add other things on top of it, these lines will stay. Now, you might not be used to drawing just straight in with something as permanent literally as waterproof ink. But you will see that, well, I've started off with a stencil, so I've got that little foundation, but I'm willing to experiment. And just remember, the art that you like looking at, is it perfect? Is every line completely thought out and solid, or can you see the hand of the artist? I love art that has got life to it. I think sometimes those little mistakes, those little resonances, they are part of what makes the art. They're not, it's not perfect. So that's something that appeals to me very greatly. So when I go in with pen and my lines go a little bit over the edges and things aren't going completely perfectly, I just keep moving. It doesn't worry me at all. I know that at the end of the day, that's not super important. The only time it's been important in my own art practice is if I'm working on a colouring in book or one of my happy hour journals, which is a very fancy schmancy mindfulness colouring in book series. And because other people are going to be colouring in those things, the lines are more perfect than anything that I've ever tried to do anyway. It was a lot of pressure, actually. I far prefer to just go willy-nilly and draw everywhere. I find that changing pens frequently, if I'm just working on an ink drawing, really helps add lots of visual texture because the density of the lines change, the shapes of the lines change, and it's almost a textural effect. And I believe you get fresh eyes every time you change your art tool because your brain has to change how it's holding it, how it's moving it, and these are all good exercises for it. Now, you might be really fabulous at drawing and you might just go like a little duck to water, drawing with ink without doing a sketch underneath. Wonderful. I encourage that completely. But maybe when you get to the colour part, after having spent so long on your drawing, that might be where you freeze. It might not be the blank page that scares you. It might be adding the colour. Well, rather than thinking what colour shall I use, I just say I'm going to use all of them. Now, I've got another technique that I teach called colour weaving, and what I'm going to show you is akin to this. It's a colour aura, we'll call it, and it's using just about every single colour that I've got in the palette. Now, I've chosen watercolours because watercolour just loves to blend with itself. It loves to go off visiting to the other colours. Some colours reject visitors that are coming over towards it. Some colours are very, very social, and some colours are not. So the only way to learn about that sort of reaction is beyond colour theory. It goes into something that's very specific to watercolor. It's part of its absolute magic. Each of the colors do have their own personalities, and you can only learn that by playing with, guess what, all of the colors. This little tin of watercolor is a combination of various watercolors that I've created in my different collections. And what makes them so wonderful is they're very highly pigmented. And if you've tried watercolor before and you've thought it's a little bit too difficult, it's probably not you. It was probably the watercolors. They weren't pigmented enough. And the other major thing that makes a big difference is the paper. Single most massive difference to the amount of happiness and joy you will experience with watercolor is watercolor paper, because the color can flow and do its thing. The other thing is having a lovely brush. So the paper that I'm using is, of course, from my collection. I'm an absolute nut for paper. I love testing papers. I love painting on them, creating with them, and use all sorts of different papers in my art practice and in my art supply collection. And the brush is part of, this particular brush is part of the brush ballet. It's very important to me personally to have cruelty-free art supplies, and especially to have cruelty-free art supplies in my collection. And there's just such wonderful modern alternatives to than using hairs from some poor little animal. You know, the whole animal goes, not just a few little hairs from its tail. So we can use amazing Japanese nylons that can hold water and hold pigment and release it when we want them to. So that's what I'm using. And the method I'm using is I'm just using all the colours. If I put a colour down and I think, whoop, that's a lot, I've just got a little bit of paper towel and I can just dab that. And that adds a little bit of space. And once I've committed to these colours and letting this rainbow aura start to appear, I'm adding in a little bit of detail here and there. And I have a little rule. If I get a splatter or a splash, that opens the gates to adding more. So if I get a droplet, I then purposely start splashing droplets. It's like a little permission slip right there. And if you pop a colour down with watercolor that you feel, oh, okay, I'm learning something here. That's not what I wanted. That's not working out how I expected, or, oh, okay, that's not gelling with me. You're learning something, and that's extremely valuable. You can't call it a mistake. It's just a lesson. And that's why you have a little bit of paper towel there just to dab it off. At the end, you'll have a beautiful paper towel full of gorgeous colours. And then as watercolor dries, which this is doing right now, you can go over your watercolor, and instead of them just blending and blending as they do when they're wet, once they've started to dry off and you're adding other watercolor on, it starts to become a little bit layerable. So you can get some little details in there. And that's what I'm adding, just some little, are they leaves? Are they flowers? Are they fireworks? Is this just the emotion of the day that is coming from this lovely lady, this señorita? And then just let the colours shift on the page. And then the colours don't just shift on the page. They shift within you, and they shift you. And as the colours flow, so does the self-doubt. It goes straight out the door, because you realise you don't need to get anything right. You just need to let the colour move. Confidence, I've learned, isn't loud. It's quiet and curious, and it can be kind. And it often arrives in waves of turquoise and pink and gold. If you've ever paused before you've begun, if you've waited to be good before you got started, this is your sign you don't need permission. But if it helps, here it is. You are allowed to create, and you are allowed to create in full colour. So use the stencil, use all the pens, all the colours. You don't need to finish, but you do need to begin. This was watercolour, a black pen, a rainbow aura, and a willingness to try. Confidence didn't come before the art. It comes because of the art. And if anything that I've said resonates with you, then you should check out my online workshops. They are just completely packed with painting permission slips and colourful confetti for the soul. You'll find all the links below. You can leave a comment, a like, subscribe to the channel. But most importantly, tell me which colour is it that gives you the most colour confidence. And don't forget to take the quiz. And the quiz is actually, as well as being fun, based on sound and well-known colour principles of psychology and of emotional therapy. Colour has an enormous impact on us as human beings. And as artists and creative people, we can harness that power and bring more happiness and joy to ourselves as we create. there's just so much to be enjoyed and learned about color, about your reactions to it, and that will change over time, over the length of your life. Your reaction to different colors, different color combinations. It's a really, really exciting world, and I'm glad I'm talking to you about it. Now, go and do some joyfully unpolished art, please.